Yeah, so welcome everybody. Most of you already know me. For those of you who don't, my name is Ted Wolf. I'm with WMBD WYZZ, your local TBS and Fox TV stations here in Bloomington. And wanted to welcome you to our second Lunch and Learn. And glad to see you all here. Wanted to say thank you to Greg Saarinen of Under Wraps for providing today's lunch. Unfortunately, he couldn't stay. Normally he would come in and say, you know, this is Under Wraps and this is the type of food we provide. He's in downtown Bloomington. If you look, there are also loyalty cards by the wrap tray where you can punch off and buy 10 wraps and get your 11th wrap free. So take advantage of it. It's good food, fresh. He says his veggies are always fresh daily. And you can tell when you taste it. He also wanted to mention that he is now starting box lunches, so you can access that on his website. He also has Alla Tavala, which is his Italian restaurant food. This is something that you can order to go. He has some great flatbread pizzas and all sorts of stuff. Fresh ingredients as always. So I want to say thank you to Greg for providing this for us. Unfortunately, he had too many customers and could not stay. So wanted to say that. Wanted to thank you all for showing up and hopefully you enjoy the lunch. But I'm going to turn this over to Bret Johnson, who many of you will remember from our last one, who is our Nexstar digital guy out of Peoria. And I work with Bret on a regular basis, and he's going to do a little introduction.
Yeah,
and I'm not going
to take long. I just want to thank everybody for coming. For those of you that watched the one that I did last year, I hope you got something out of it. But I'm very happy that we were able this year to bring my regional vice president in, Megan Glenn. Megan has worked at WGN. She has worked at Flowcode. She's worked at a lot of different digital properties. And she is going to she's going to show us some new things in digital, some new trends and so forth today. So Megan.
Yes. We have a clicker right here. So sadly, it's not working for me. So I have you all set up here. Perfect. This works. And then that way I love it. Great. I'm gonna scoot it over a little bit. Oh, yes. Hi, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Like Bret said, my name is Megan. Regional digital director at Nexstar, longtime digital native. I started in local print longer ago than I care to admit. And basically since then, I've always just kind of worked in digital in one capacity or another. So, I kind of subscribe to the belief that like, if somebody calls themselves an expert, don't trust them. So I'm not gonna say by any means that everything that I'm gonna say is truth, but these are some objective, just kind of observations that come from working with Nexstar or even prior to this in past lives. As Bret mentioned, working for Flowcode, the QR code company, I basically managed the entire media industry. Disney was my client, and NBC was my client, Dr. Phil was my client, everybody. And so I had this really, really interesting and in-depth look at kind of how consumers are interacting with media, what their preferences are, kind of what the data looks like, and how advertisers, even in our space, can benefit from some of these like macro level trends that we're seeing in 2024. So just by way of kind of high level overview, little bit of an agenda, we'll do a little intro on who Nexstar is so you guys can kind of be like, well, who is Megan and why do we care? We have some insights and then we'll get into a little bit more about the technical side. We'll talk a lot about buzzwords today, but I'm basically just going to boil this down to like, this is what it actually means and here's how it benefits you. Won't bore you to tears with this slide. Long and short, Nexstar is a media giant here in the United States. We own 116 stations, or is it 200 stations and 116 media properties. Lots and lots of websites and mobile apps that we own ourselves. We also own The Hill. We own the CW. We also have, kind of a very robust portfolio of partners. So basically when you're talking to Nexstar, you're talking to a media organization that has virtual 100% penetration in the United States from one way or another. So why I bring this up is basically when you are looking at Bret and his team here locally, they're taking the expertise that has been gained from working with businesses, small and large, across the entire nation in every single market and every single vertical, and they're distilling that expertise down and hyper localizing it for you. And so it's not so much about like, yeah, we care about our national reach. I'm sure that it's amazing to you guys. You're all very impressed that we have so many viewers, but what it means is that you get to access the expertise that comes along with it. Little bit of an event, like a more in-depth view. And here's kind of what it looks like just for Peoria and Bloomington. Now, granted, this is very, very small, but when we're looking at, well, very, very small view, I should say, kind of concise view of just the local geography. But what you'll see down here below is that we kind of take a very data first approach to how we actually look at audiences. We know that media has changed a lot over the years in terms of like viewership. How do we measure? What do we do? And Nexstar is a very data-driven organization. And so when you look at kind of the way we approach things, we want to be able to show you right off the top, this is the addressable audience. Here's what they look like. Here is your consumer base. How do we reach those people? And when you add this region, our Peoria, Bloomington, into the neighboring regions that we have, our sister stations in Champaign, Chicago, Rockford, we virtually blanket the state of Illinois. So whether you do business here hyper locally, or if you have a broader reach in the state or out of the state, goodness knows we can reach them. So I'm a big data nerd. I did a little bit of research to put some numbers behind what we're seeing, but thought I'd share a couple of things with you. So unsurprisingly, most marketers are not planning on decreasing any of their digital advertising spend. So actually, when you look at this data, the actual study itself says that 94% of people are planning on increasing or maintaining their spend. When you look at the number of that actually says decreasing, it's a flat 0% of surveyed audiences said they were planning on decreasing their digital spend. And I mentioned that just to say, I mean, still here, not going anywhere. I don't think that's a surprise to any of us. But when we kind of dial into like, well, what are we actually spending on? How are consumers engaging with it? Also, probably unsurprisingly, social media is definitely kind of gaining traction as the go-to source for information. And so one of the most interesting statistics that I like is platforms like TikTok and Reddit are actually overtaking platforms like YouTube and Google for search volume. So instead of doing the kind of old way of going to Google, typing in your search, browsing the results that way, consumers are more interested in receiving information directly from peers and perceived trusted sources, right? And so the new flow is, where can I see this in-depth review of a product? Where can I see what this dress actually looks like on? Where can I see advanced insights into what this car looks like? If we think about the platforms that we're currently using, social, it's the new word of mouth. It's where people are going to highlight and share. And so as a result, TikTok actually has more video minutes viewed since its inception than YouTube does overall. So think about that for a second. Think about how long YouTube has been around and TikTok by comparison, and think about the length of content on TikTok. That's a lot of volume. That's a lot of videos viewed. And so it's a really interesting kind of thing that's redefined the way that consumers are doing their online shopping. They're going online and researching with perceived peers. Something that's really interesting about that too is that we've become very discerning as consumers. We don't like advertising. We like trusted reviews. We like feeling like things are personalized. And as a result, 76% of consumers say they're more likely to purchase when that ad experience, when that content experience feels more personalized to them. So it's less so about broad messaging. It's less so about the idea of one size fits all in advertising. We like to be spoken to directly, right? And I think I feel that way as a consumer. You guys feel when it's more relevant, it makes sense, right? And then another piece that I love is in terms of the actual types of content that people are consuming. Again, going back to the concept of video, 73% of consumers actually say they would rather watch a short form video as part of their research process than just about any other type of content. So again, when we think about what we're putting out into the world, is our strategy aligning with kind of these content preferences? Are we being informational? Are we being conversational? Are we meeting our customers where they actually are in these social platforms? in this research process. So, when I think about kind of the role that we play in this and like where we gain this insight and kind of why Nextstar is a little bit aligned to this consumer insight here. 80% of news consumers say seeing ads within news content increases or maintains brand trust. So what I kind of circle back to on that is the idea of brand safety. And like, while we do love social media content, while we do love kind of being able to target audiences wherever they go, we also know brand safety and brand trust are of absolute paramount importance. So when we think about where we're aligning and things like that, news content, weather content, sports content, always going to be pretty brand safe. And so it also is helpful that when consumers see you in those positions, it immediately establishes a sense of trust. Kind of a nice little handshake there. I love this stat here because I think that it shows kind of a difference in the way consumers are making purchase decisions. So the old way of doing things, you go on Google because you know what you're looking for, right? You're searching a product, you know what you're looking for. You've been influenced by broad format media. You've been influenced by your peers, all of these things. I think it's really interesting that content plays such a role in our process of research that 51% of people now are saying that if they are served relevant content in that research process, it has the power to change their decision. So what does that mean for us as marketers? Content is king. We need to be a part of that process at kind of every stage because people can be snatched away from the competition at virtually any moment of that process, which is very interesting, I think. Another one that I heard was in the automotive industry specifically, was that only 30% of people who are shopping for cars know what kind of car they want to buy. Isn't that interesting? Back before, we think about things like brand loyalty and we think about the way that people have shopped and like, oh yeah, my parents have always driven a Nissan, I'm going to drive a Nissan. Well, now it's so different. We're so easily influenced by content around us that process has totally changed and we honestly can be swayed in one way or another. And then, yeah, this bottom one, I mean, I think this kind of goes without saying, like talking about all of the things that we're talking about between content, all of the messaging that we're getting, where we're seeing brands, how we're accessing information. 90% of consumers would prefer to see the brands that they interact with in brand safe environments, right? They're not going to do business with, you know, a brand that's advertising on Bob's blog. Like I want to be able to see that the brands I'm aligned with are aligned with causes and things that I care about, right? So that definitely cycles down to the idea of brand safe content. So kind of like high level, like what does this all even mean? And like, how do we distill this and what's the common like thread here? Consumers are doing a lot of research and they're doing it online. Price and promotion are still really important, but what's kind of interesting about this too is that consumers are looking for more meaningful and more personalized messaging. When we look at the behaviors of like millennials and under, right? So like kind of this upcoming crowd of spenders, it's all about value, but it's not necessarily value the way we think about it, dollar value, right? That's obviously still important, but it's personal values. Does this brand or this business that I'm doing business with, do they align with me as a human being? It kind of impacts the way brands are going to market. We've noticed a lot recently, and I'm sure that you guys are seeing this as consumers too. Very storytelling anchored creative, like very like interesting and kind of next level ways of presenting a brand, very social feeling creative, and even in some cases like immersive or experiential. I'm sure, I don't know if you guys have been seeing things like the AR billboards and things like that people are putting out there where suddenly, you know, I saw one that was like in Dubai and there was a Barbie. It was like during the Barbie premiere, there's a Barbie that was the size of the Burj Khalifa. You just had to scan a QR code and then suddenly consumers were having this incredible immersive experience. And when we think about the old ways of positioning value, it's a dollar sign. Now value is brand experience and personal value. So it's really interesting about kind of how that plays in. Organic and native content are definitely going to kind of win the day. Again, this goes back to the idea of value and trust and brand trust. People don't like advertising. Full stop, right? Like people are seeing diminished return on things like social advertising, opt-out rates. on receiving advertising higher than ever, right? Because people don't love advertising. When we look at the content that performs best, that drives the best results, things like that, it's authentic, it's meaningful. And in often cases, it fits really seamlessly into the environment that the user is viewing. So when I say the word native, it's basically what it means. Native advertising, native content, it fits into the format, right? So browsing through a news website and I see a sponsored article, I'm more likely to engage with it because it matches the format versus something that like, jumps out at the page at me as being advertising. So it's interesting because it kind of ties in these two things. The customer expectation around the ad experience, the ad content is totally different. And that kind of brings us down to the bottom, personalization, relevance, all of these things are really, really important. But how do we do things like personalization, relevance, all of these things if we don't know who the audience is? And so I think about the old ways of buying media, broadcast, all of the kind of large format. We make these assumptions about who our audience is, right? And we come up with creative, and we assume, and then we wait and see what works, right? The new way of doing things is very audience first. And so, we're going to talk a little bit about how to identify that user, how to personalize the experience. What does this actually mean and how do we do it? Raise your hand if you've heard the term first party data at all in the last. Yeah, so first party data is a very big buzzword in tech right now. We're all used to the idea of third party data. It's basically saying, hey, I know that this audience exists. They've shared their data with other brands and with other ad networks and things. I would like to set a profile of somebody that I'd like to target, and I'd like to use other people's data to identify that user. That's where those creepy ads come from, when they kind of follow you around. Somebody makes an assumption based on your behavior and targets you accordingly, right? So that's what we would call like third party data. First party data is the new hot thing. It is a fancy way to describe email, physical address, phone number, survey responses. First party data is data, user data, specific identifiable data that a consumer is choosing to share with you directly, your business directly. It becomes first party. Now, it's all really, really useful, right? Especially if we're strategic about how we're using this. And we'll talk about that in a second too, but email, I'm always going to be a big email fan. It's very silly. Like we think about this all the time. We've been collecting consumer email addresses for like 25 years. And like, it doesn't sound especially sexy, but when it's done right, you get $40 to $60 of return on every dollar spent in email marketing. I had that stat doing some research yesterday from HubSpot. It fully tracks with the campaigns that we run. But when you see it granular, it's like, it's ROI, you know what I mean? That doesn't exist across a lot of like platforms like that. You look at advertising, sometimes it feels like a sunk cost. $40 to $60 on everything you spend is pretty crazy. Physical address, I think that goes without saying. First of all, I want to be able to match exactly the household of somebody. That's a really good piece of data for matching a lead to a purchase. Love being able to say that, right? Perfect for verification, but also I love mail campaigns. I also love being able to see somebody's physical address and using technology now that lets me find all of the devices in that physical address. We'll talk about that in a second too, but that's a really, really valuable piece of information too. Phone number, I don't even need to tell you, my phone is never more than 10 feet away from me at any given moment. Somebody taps into my phone, they know everything about me, probably more than I want them to know, to be honest with you, but valuable for us as business owners, valuable for us as marketers, because that is such a personal device. If you can text somebody, if you can call them, if you can target that device and it's with them at all of these moments, totally makes sense. And survey responses, this one I tossed in here because I feel like it doesn't get a lot of credit in the first party data ecosystem. We think about these pieces all the time, but context is always going to be everything, right? So if I have all of this information about our dude here in the middle, can I do a lot with it if I don't have things like this? And so there are so many ways, and it doesn't have to be like, hey, fill out this survey. It's how are my social followers responding to content on my page? If I put up a vote quiz and say like, hey, do you like blue, red, or purple better, right? I suddenly have more insight about all of the people in my database. And it's not hard. It's not difficult and it's not cumbersome on the consumer either. There are so many tools at our disposal where we can generate that contextual information and then use it, right? So first party data, buzzword, everybody's talking about it. Everybody from Pepsi to Home Depot to, you know, Bob's Burgers down the street. Everybody is talking about first party data. Everybody's like, great, totally know I need it. How do I get it? Some easy ways to, well, not easy, but like ways to get first party data at scale, subscriptions. Going back to that, I mean, I know it's been 25 years of saying like, hey, subscribe for our newsletter or download our app or whatever it is. But that's always going to be a very big source for us because when somebody opts into receiving that information from you, they're opting into receiving more, right? And when we take email addresses or phone numbers and all of these things, it unlocks a whole new avenue for us to be delivering messaging. And I'll show you the technology behind that in a second. But bear in mind, those ways of collecting first party data are a great way to tap into those really hand-raising consumers, right? Contesting and promotions. I am always going to be a contest fan. Nexstar loves contests. We do things like, you know, enter to win mortgage payments for a year, or I've seen enter to win a $50 gift card. It could be huge, it could be small. Bottom line, people love to exchange their information for a chance to win something. I'll show you some contests, but long and short, this is a great way to get people to give you something in exchange for something else, right? It doesn't have to be big. I'll show you the example that I'm going to show you. You're going to laugh at. I'll show you. Loyalty programs. I actually was thinking about under wraps. You're like, oh, he has loyalty cards and all of this stuff. Guys, this is a really awesome thing. The exchange, right? So give me your number, give me your email, and I will give you discounts every time you come. And I will also give you like a big prize if you spend enough, right? So like there's so many different ways to unlock that experience, and it encourages people to keep coming even though they've already shared that information with you. It's like one of these things that has the halo benefit of it driving additional traffic. I love a loyalty program. And then conquest advertising. So here's where we start talking about like, okay, if we know that we need to get data, and I have all this data and I have all this methodology of grabbing data, this is where we tap into advertising to scale it up. Right? Because it's one thing to host your own contest. It's one thing to do your own promotion. And it's one thing to kind of speak to your own little ecosystem. But we always want to keep the funnel full. We always want to find the new people. And that's where your advertising is totally going to come in. There's a lot in the advertising ecosystem that is going to actually help you feed the rest of these, right? So how do we use the advertising that we have, the old ways of doing things, the TV, the out of home, all of this to help us unlock more of this data so we can drive more efficiency. So we'll say we've got our database, right? We've got the existing group of emails that have been subscribed to us for 25 years. I have a number, like a whole bunch of phone numbers, all of this stuff. What do I do with it? How do I use that existing information to scale up the marketing that I'm doing and find more customers? It's amazing because the technology now exists to be able to take those pieces of first party data and use them to match an individual to the devices that they use. So examples of this would be taking like an email address and matching it to an IP address, taking a phone number, matching it to a device ID. And all of these data points that correspond with these very finite positions allow us to say, okay, well, if I have one user's email and I now have all of their devices too, I'm going to focus on that user and I'm going to have multiple touch points around them, right? Because we've now identified the user specifically and all of the things that they use throughout the day. And now, because I know that user, I can see, great, I can find their phone. I know where they live. I can find their household too. Social media, easy. All of these digitally targeted pieces that can be served based on the email, based on the phone number, based on the device that we've been able to map. It allows us to take our advertising from passive, putting our message out there and hoping that the right people see it, or the new way of doing it, being like making assumptions and targeting data to people that, or targeting messaging to people that don't know you. This now allows us to do what's called addressable. So the old way of doing things, like we said, one to many. We want to send our message out to a whole bunch of people, big, broad format, and we're going to keep the funnel full because people are going to come through market as they do, right? Depending on what kind of business it is. Addressable flips that on its head and it goes one to one. So the easiest way to think about it is if we have her name, email, phone number, household address, I now can develop an entire content scheme, advertising scheme and content scheme around the platforms I know that she uses. And based on the information I already know about my consumer, my hand raiser, the information I can see about the content that she's consuming, the information that I can see about the offers that she responds to and things like that. We start being able to personalize the message around who this user is, right? And when we bring this out, we know obviously that it's a lot of lift. Let's say you've got 2,000 people in your database. You're like, I am not customizing messaging for all 2,000 of those people. The automation that we are able to bring thanks to digital technology now allows us to replicate that one-to-one experience, but do it across a whole lot of people. So what sounds very complicated, it's actually very easy once you have the data piece. So I would look at this and I would say, okay, I know that my consumer has opted into receiving messaging from me because they shared their phone number, their email, and all of these things. I also know based on data, what generally speaking that demo might be interested in. It allows us to start planning. Now, the old way, like we said, large format, I'm gonna wait for them to come to me. TV, I'm gonna buy by day parts, ratings, I'm gonna look at audience indexes, I'm gonna make a very solid effort, but ultimately, we're being presumptive, right? Out of home, same thing. I love out of home, but like the way you buy it, presumptive. Now you're saying, I know that my consumers come by here. I know a lot of my consumers live here. I know a lot of people can like commute, so I'm gonna wrap the buses, whatever that looks like. It's presumptive. And then even online, even though we have traditionally had the capability of being super, super efficient, super, super accurate, does it matter if that consumer doesn't know that we have their data? Does it matter? Is that the most premium experience for that consumer when they haven't raised their hand and said, yes, that's the brand I want to hear from. That's the information that I want to hear. It's presumptive. Yeah, right? And so it's like, if we are the ones who are kind of in this echo chamber deciding, this is how I'm buying, this is how I'm placing, this is where my audience has to come to find me, does it feel like there's a lot of room to increase efficiency? Again, flipping the script. So if I have the device, if I have the personal information, if I have the audience interests and all of these things because I did the due diligence to collect the data, now I can actually be a little bit more strategic about where I'm placing that messaging and go where the eyeballs go. Don't make them come to me. I'm going to go where they are. And sometimes it's interesting because now with things like TV, it's all on demand. And it isn't limited to the living room anymore. Obviously, a lot of it happens there, but if you're like me, I live out of a suitcase. I watch TV on 10,000 different devices a year. If you wanted to be able to find me, you for sure would have to follow me specifically, right? And that's addressable, right? That makes sense. For me as a subscriber, you want to find me, you got to be a little bit more broad than just assuming that I'm going to be in one place. Because while I might be woman 2564, I might not be watching what you think I'm watching. On the go, this is the other thing too. We know that there are so many media touch points. Customers are inundated with media all the time. Think about it for you guys. If I asked you today, how many advertisements have you seen so far? You're like, I don't freaking know. It's like social, it's video, it's TV, it's radio, it's all of these different things. And we know that oftentimes like there are ways for us to tap into that behavior and stay in front of somebody in a meaningful way. And when you're like targeting a user specifically, it takes a little bit of that guesswork out, right? Because then you're saying, okay, well, I don't need to buy all of that out of home because I know now that this person actually is more likely to be listening to Spotify in their car when they're on their way. Great, like that's a more captive way to for me to reach that audience. It's a way for us to eliminate the waste and really identify like, what are the real behaviors of this audience? I've done the work of capturing their data. They're raising their hands. I know that I can advertise to them. Great, let's find their devices. Let's find them instead of surrounding them with everything else. And then online, the thing that's really interesting is like, when we cycle back to the idea of authenticity and community and like the online voice, the trusted influencer, the kind of way that people are consuming content. The old way of targeting advertising to a passive audience who's just like bombarded with stuff that they don't necessarily need all the time. We all have horror stories of seeing ads where like, what is that? Like, why did I get served that? Now, the expectation, because that has been the old way of doing things, the expectation now is a more curated experience, community-based, right? Think about the Facebook groups that we're a part of. Think about the trends on TikTok. Think about the way that we research products now. It's very in-depth and very content-heavy and very dependent on others. And so where, you think about what's going to be impactful, the old way of just blasting somebody with banners or, kind of getting tonnage in digital might not be the way anymore. Are you going to get more out of 100,000 banner ads, or is custom video content on YouTube something that's going to make more sense, right? So really aligning with those real behaviors and really aligning with the idea of going audience first as opposed to position first is totally the way forward. So all of us probably have data in some capacity. So this is the way that I would think that you might be able to generate very solid results, even in the short term, using some addressable technologies. Now, most of the time, the way that these technologies work is obviously, like we said, you're going to provide your data, whether it's a phone number, whether it's an IP address, well, actually, IP comes later. But let's say that you have email, phone number, address. Addressable systems and most ad tech systems, so like Nexstar, I'm speaking from experience with our platform. You take this database, you upload it, and then it will go back to kind of our audience mapping technology, and it'll say, okay, I see 5,000 of these addresses. I'm able to match 60% of them back to a household IP address, and that opens up all of the devices that are going to be connected to that IP address, right? So it's tech behind the scenes. We don't necessarily need to go down the rabbit hole about it. We can certainly talk more in depth, but for sake of argument right now, high level, the technology exists for us to take all of this data, all of these pieces of data, and match them back to real meaningful placements, devices, households, real physical things for our consumers. And so when we have that information, I'm going to do things like emails. So if I already have that email address, great. The subscriber emails and retention, all of those things, great, amazing, makes so much sense. Conquest email is where we start getting exciting with how we're pulling more data from users. So there's one part of it that's targeting opted-in users. For your purposes, let's say you're doing conquest email, you would come to somebody like a Nexstar or somebody, your digital provider, and you would say, okay, I want to tap into your database. I want to reach consumers that match these attributes. It could be demo, it could be physical location, it could be as granular as modeled credit score, it could be presence of children in home. There's virtually limitless options when you want to do something like a conquest email. Email goes out. Amazing. We love email just for the results. It's a one-to-one experience. You typically get a lot of engagement right off the front. There is a reason that email has been around as long as it has. I call it the granddaddy of digital marketing. It's the least sexy thing to talk about, but boy, is it really impactful. The cool thing about a lot of these email programs is that the reporting and the data that you can get back from that consumer, whether it's because you prompted them to make a purchase, you prompted them to enter a contest, you prompted them to do something, or in our case, we're very lucky because our email comes with full reporting that shows physical address of that recipient. And so for our purposes, when I think about building addressable and gathering data, not only do I have the benefit of the conquest aspect, reaching out, finding new people based on these attributes, But also, I now have the ability to take all of those people I just reached and immediately put them into my first party database. And when I have all those addresses, physical addresses, I now have a whole bunch of people that I can map their IPs. I can map their IP addresses and all of their devices, and it's super opted in. These are hand raisers who say, I want more messaging about an auto loan. I want more messaging about weight loss. I want more messaging about, I don't know, give me anything. Could be anything, right? All of the things that are out there to shop for. These are very opted in hand raisers that now I'm able to take that information and translate it into all of those other devices. So one touch point turns into CTV and online video, obviously another very big buzzword right now. We hear OTT, CTV, FVP. Long and short, TV is TV is TV is TV, video is video. So when you think about how you're buying TV and how it is for the consumer, consumers just watching video, consumers just watching TV. They're not discerning. I don't go home at night and say, cool, I'm gonna watch broadcast and now I'm gonna watch CTV. No, I'm just looking for the show I wanna watch, right? Like, we don't think about it that way. If the commercial experience is the same in all of them. We're used to pre-roll on mobile. We're used to 15s and 30s on TV. The experience is the same. Why are we differentiating? I generally don't. But what's awesome is regardless of how that consumer is watching TV, whether they're in their living room, whether they're like me on a laptop, in a hotel, whatever. If I'm able to find that user's device and speak to that device directly, do I care what kind of TV they're watching? I don't. I want to be able to know that I can serve an addressable, personalized, relevant message to that person wherever they're watching. And when you have an email address, a physical address, that becomes a lot easier to unlock, again, because we're doing device mapping. We're taking what we know about somebody's physical location, their preferences, that person specifically, and we're matching it up to the online ecosystem that they live in. And so when I talk about online video, CTV, FEP, OTT, alphabet soup, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And that's kind of a sidebar here, but just like while we're talking about marketing, TV is TV, TV is TV is TV. So we're able to serve targeted television commercials directly to a specific user. So again, talking about broad format, the old way of doing things, broadcast, like I want people to see my message and respond to it, whether they're in market or not. CTV allows us to say, I'm only going to serve these TV commercials to somebody who is in market, somebody who is interested. I can see their data. I know their information. They're in market. Cross-device retargeting, it goes back to the idea of device mapping. If I have somebody's email, if I have somebody's phone number, if I have, any first-party data about somebody, the technology exists to then turn it into, well, if I've got somebody's email, I can find their mobile phone, I can find their television, I can find their tablets, whatever that is. And then the technology exists to just serve ads across all of them. The idea is going where the eyeballs go, and it's simply a matter of having all formats of creative available, right? So I want a video ad, I want a display ad, I want a social ad, and I just want to serve it regardless of where that person is going. It's audience first. You go where the eyeballs go. I don't buy everything in the hopes that somebody shows up at it. I'm going to buy the person, and then I'm going to show up wherever they go. Right? Reverse engineering just a little bit. And then social content. This is probably the most easy addressable solution that you guys can use right now. Facebook ad platform allows you to take email addresses and target people by those email addresses. I think they do phone numbers too. I haven't been in there in a little bit, so I don't remember exactly. But we know that if I have all of this information and I have collected that information via a contest, via a subscription, via a super specific ad message, right? Can you start building social content and audiences that feels a little bit more relevant to that user, right? So instead of having general branding, let's say, again, I'm going to use the auto example because I feel like auto makes so much sense. Let's say that I have a whole database and I'm able to segment all of my email addresses and phone numbers into groups of people who have already done business with me. Maybe they have leases coming up. Maybe they're a service audience. And then I have my conquest audience, right? So these are all people who are new that maybe I ran a contest, did some advertising, got those leads somehow, but they're the new category. Those two categories of people don't need the same messaging. Like if I'm a brand new automotive client, I'm probably not gonna respond super well to a lease renewal creative, right? Like that's a super basic example, but building up the personalization by being specific with those audiences, it's super easy to achieve on Facebook and Instagram because it's manual, easy to upload, easy to segment out, and then you just serve your creative accordingly. So when we talk about addressable and when we talk about personalized content and all of this, the technology exists to have like dynamic ads that have your name and your most recent purchase and all of that, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's just about being strategic. It's about being strategic with the messaging. It's about being strategic with the placement and about going audience first, user first. So like, why do we care? So this is the way that I look at it. Efficiency, obviously a big one. We all know what it's like, the economy right now, the spending, the decreased amount that consumers are spending in a political cycle. We all know. It's not really going to be a huge year for growth. It's not projected to be a big year for growth across very many industries. And so efficiency is obviously a huge part of the puzzle. And so when we're looking at audience first, a finite number of people, we're being very specific about who we're targeting, and we've pre-qualified those users by saying, like, they're a hand raiser, they entered my contest, they're a hand raiser, they responded to my ad. They're a hand raiser, I targeted an email to somebody whose data attributes match XYZ. We pre-qualify that audience, we pre-identify that audience, and then we use that audience to find more people who look like that. We eliminate the waste of doing the broad format that serves to everybody, right? So when we're playing the efficiency game, it's cool to start with that finite audience and grow it from there because you have so much more control. So this is the other piece of the puzzle that I love. When you know how many people you're working with, when you have an addressable audience, when you have the insight ahead of time, you have a lot more control over how many ads you serve, how many times they see you. We have all been in the position where you're like watching TV and you're like, I have seen this commercial 15 times today. It's got a negative impact, right? We know that how that feels as consumers. We don't want to do it as business owners either. And so one of the benefits of working off that database list of that first party data is knowing exactly how many people you're talking to. And then when you grow it out, it also gives you that record of like scale. How many people are we working with? Collapsing the funnel, the old way of doing things is generating interest, filling the top of the funnel and waiting for people to kind of come down the funnel. We capture those people at the bottom. Those are the final converting sales, but the ones at the top, we gotta wait for them to get all the way down, right? And we know in every single industry, that's a different thing. Automotive, 3 to 6 months, you know, healthcare, I'm sure, so much longer. And then we have super short ones too, restaurants, small ticket retail. We kind of know what those are like. But when we are focusing around the audience and we can control the reach and frequency, we know how many times they're going. The messaging is really personalized. It's directly relevant to what they want, what they're shopping for, what they're in market in, what they're in market for, what they're interested in. The funnel collapses. It takes a little bit less time outside of things like auto is very specialized. Obviously, there are big ticket things that are always going to take a little bit longer. But in a lot of cases, you're going to move somebody through the funnel a lot faster when every touch point that they have is directly relevant to them. And the measurability. So this one is probably, you know, it ties back to the efficiency aspect. But when we talk about knowing what works and moving somebody through the funnel and really being able to understand that point A to point Z journey, addressable and addressable digital are so helpful, even if just for the metrics, right? So if we're just thinking about like, I had a contest and I got somebody to enter, and now I have their data and I can see every impression that I've served them and I can see every time that they've engaged with me. It gives me a rinse and repeat process because then I can start analyzing those trends and seeing what works for my audience specifically? How do I rinse and repeat? And how do I grow this? I honestly think that the biggest benefit of digital is the metric support it offers to anything else that you do. TV, we talk about this all the time, like whether it's CTV or whether it's broadcast TV, the first thing anybody's gonna do when they're influenced is do a Google search, right? Do I think that Google won that impression? Do I think that Google should take the credit for the sale? No, I think that's analytics for TV. So think about your digital that way too. That's a really important piece. And then like the big question is like, well, does it actually work? Like, have people put this into practice and seen meaningful results? And do you have to spend $1 billion to get a solid result? Do you have to be super sophisticated and complicated and all of the things? No, the simple answer is no. And I think that's probably my biggest thing is being a digital native coming through this technology. It feels so complicated. Cookies and data and IP addresses and device mapping and foot traffic attribution and ROI and all of the things that we try to track. And it's like so many details to keep track of. But what I love about addressable solutions is that they're remarkably simple. Remarkably simple. We identify the user, we go where the user goes. So here's a really cool one that I love. Automotive is a lot of fun because I think it's one of the ones that has more research behavior, more touch points, generally speaking, lots of things to talk about when we're talking about automotive sales. But this one, they did addressable email and addressable display. Basically, they sent a targeted email blast. They said, I want to reach people who have visited Kelley Blue Book and Auto Trader, who have demonstrated the fact that they are in market for a vehicle. Maybe they already drive a Toyota. Credit score, income, physical location, all of these things. We pre-qualified that audience. We went back to Nextstar's database and said, great, we have a whole bunch of people who we can serve that messaging to. Now, we did that because our reporting is awesome and came with the physical addresses. We now had that addressable data that we could work with, which then allowed us to turn on addressable display ads. So the way that that worked was we served the email ad to our auto shopper. They got it. Probably responded to it, but even the ones that didn't, they're like, yeah, this is cool. I'll think about it later. But then over the next coming days and weeks, every device they turned on had a display ad that matched that email creative. And so it's consistency, it's based on the single user, and it's relevant to that specific user because we pre-qualified them. We identified their behavior. Now, our goal, obviously leads. I mean, I think it's funny when we talk about leads, like, hey, what's your goal? Like we talk all the time, oh, site lift, more social follows, all of these things. It always boils down to sales. Is my phone ringing? Is the cash register going? Like 1,000,000%. So obviously they're like, yeah, I want to be able to see that I moved cars off of this campaign. So during the campaign, they were able to match back directly. So first party data, physical address, email address, first party data to data captured in a sale, 82 incremental vehicle sales from that pre-qualified audience list. We attribute it back to relevance, timeliness, first party data, one-to-one experience, and then using the addressable methodology to drive that frequency, collapse the funnel a little bit. Over 10 new vehicles sold per month from direct clickers, right? Take out the people who were like, you know, who might like this? My brother. Or take out the people who weren't in market right then and came back 30 days later. This is literally a short term during the campaign in progress. 10 people per month received the email, clicked the email creative, bought a car. One-to-one attribution. It followed the entire daisy chain of that behavior, right? And their ROAS, return on ad spend, $139,000. That's a 5.5x return on their overall investment. I love a 5.5x return on investment. You know what I mean? Like, okay. This one's a little bit of a brag, you guys. You heard me say at the top that Dr. Phil was my client. True story. I get a text at like 9 a.m. one day from my CEO at the tech company I was working at. He goes, "Can you get on this call in like 5 minutes?" I'm like, "Sure." Any context notes? Zero response. No response. So I'm like, cool. I have no idea what this call is gonna be. I was the second person on the Zoom call. The first person on the Zoom call was Dr. Phil. And so imagine you just like, he's sitting there, he's looking at me. I'm like, "Hi, Dr. Phil, do I call you that?" He's like, "Yeah, that's fine." I'm like, "Okay, cool." So Dr. Phil, what I found out was that Dr. Phil was separating from CBS. They had this very, very long partnership. And he says, "Well, I can't say what my new project is, but I can tell you that I need a database of people. Like I need to be able to get a whole bunch of subscribers that I can still speak to after I leave CBS." And we're like, "Great, awesome." I was working at the QR code company at the time. The company is called Flowcode. Just spoiler alert, putting QR codes on TV, amazing. It's really wild to see the data, but he's like, "We need first party data. I need to find first party data." I'm like, "Great, let's do a contest." And so we put the flow code, he ran it in CBS promo inventory. It's literally a scan for your chance to win a Dr. Phil hoodie. Nothing crazy, not a big lift on his end, not a big lift on our end. The promo inventory was there already. He was already gonna be running in it. Like, we did not do anything insane. We ran it for a week and he got 65,000 new people. And that doesn't include the people who are already in his database and also wanted to enter to win the sweatshirt. These were new people who wanted to enter that contest for a sweatshirt. Is that decent ROI? Like personally, is like, I think about that ROI and I'm like, holy cow. And it was so easy. And when we looked at the conversion rates, when we look at the number of people who engaged with the creative and then went on to complete the secondary action of entering that contest, it's about a 70% conversion rate. I've seen much higher too. The secret weapon about QR is that you can't accidentally scan a QR code where everything else can be accidental. You could argue banner clicks could be accidental. There's things like bot traffic, all of this stuff happens. You can't accidentally scan a QR code. You have to take your phone out. So the likelihood of somebody completing that action after they scan is very, very high. So if you're ever exploring QR in advertising or anything like that, it's a very valuable tool regardless of how much volume you get, because it's a super sit forward audience. Love it for attribution, love it for data capture. Here's another one. This one I like because it shows that like the cost of entry and the barrier to entry can be super, super low. This was a Japanese steakhouse, and I think they were in North Carolina. They said, "Here's a $50 gift card. Let's do a contest to give away a $50 gift card." Again, very, very minimal lift outside of their media schedule. And in the first 4 weeks, this goes back to the idea of tracking and being able to add digital to things to track out the impact of your full schedule. During the first 4 weeks, this one location restaurant received 228 new emails, and about half of those people actually showed up at the restaurant. Verified because they were able to use conquesting and retargeting. They got the user data, they mapped the devices, and then they were able to say, "Oh, that device showed up at your restaurant." The technology exists, but the key about it was the first party data aspect. It was the ability for us to capture these users and then follow them. And they were hand raisers. Restaurants are pretty easy because I feel like that's a very general thing, right? You're like, well, who doesn't want to go to a Japanese steakhouse? But the thing that's great about it is that now we know, like, okay, this is a food enthusiast who's likely to respond to an offer, lives in these areas, and probably has this length of time in decision making from initial engagement to actually showing up. All valuable insights. And the last one here, I think this one's really interesting because it talks about, like, it's a very, very cool representation of the idea of relevance. This was a kind of dual business. It was a tattoo shop that also offered tattoo removal services. And it was like one of these things, they had all this data, they had a whole bunch of subscribers, social followers, all of these, like, cool. I want to target audiences I know have tattoos with tattoo removal services. And what was cool is they were like, okay, we're gonna front load a lot of these impressions. We're gonna make a splash right off the bat and we're gonna reach people, a whole bunch of people right away. And they did, and they had, like, right away I started seeing that they were getting good engagement. And when they tapered off the delivery, they actually saw, so like, this is the cool thing. Here's the impression delivery, right? So they started really, really high on day one and tapered off by the end of the week. But look at their conversion rates, got a ton on that first day. And then as they rode the frequency, because it was relevant, because they had a finite group of people and because they could control how many impressions they delivered against those audiences, their conversion rate actually went up, even though their impression delivery went down. Again, it speaks to the idea of relevancy, timeliness. I know this audience is tattooed and I know they probably want to have some of those tattoos removed. So let's go ahead and talk to them, right? So it's this idea of speaking directly, addressing directly that audience with something that's super, super relevant to them. And again, the piece of information that tied it all together was having the data about the tattooed person, having that email address, that phone number that I could match back to their household. And TV is really impactful too. So that's the other thing, you know, you serve a CTV ad or something like that. The likelihood of somebody responding to it is pretty high. So how do you start today? These are just some recommendations that I think pretty easy, at least like low hanging fruit here. Take your email addresses, make sure that they are included in all of your campaigns for things like social, targeted digital advertising. If you're doing display, if you're doing CTV, inquire about the addressable options that you have. Speak to your existing audiences. And in some cases, so like us, one of the things is awesome is that we can take that database and then automatically start building lookalikes around it. So even if you only have a finite kind of small amount of data, let's say you've only got 100 users, we can say, great, I see those 100 users, let's find more of those, right? So get those emails included in any of your campaigns or any of that first party data that you have, and really amp up performance there. Contesting and promotions. Doesn't have to be a lot. You can run it on social. You can partner with a local media outlet or another brand to get even more reach. But if you can spare 25 bucks for a gift card, if you can spare a test drive, if you can spare a week of groceries, whatever business you are, if there is some angle, all you have to do is say, we'll give you this in exchange for this. We'll give you the option to win this in exchange for your email. Huge, huge results. So that's a really great way to get that first party data. When it comes to personalization, again, is it really awesome to have dynamic AI driven creative that speaks to the user directly and might have, I don't know, their name in it, whatever. It doesn't have to be complicated like that. But start getting strategic when you are running those social campaigns, when you are running those ad campaigns, start thinking a little bit about how you're segmenting that messaging out so that people are receiving the information from you that's most relevant. Advertising strategically. So the old way of doing things, starting out very broad, and then waiting for people to come and find you. There's so much data out there that even if you were to take, let's say you take your database and you come to Bret and you say, hey, Bret, like what should I do with this? It's the ability to find those users, map them out on a map, and then be able to say like, hey, there's also these other attributes that you should consider about placement and things like that. Look at your databases, look at all the insights and the preferences that you can glean from that, whether it's the content they engage with on social, the purchases they make, the things they tend to respond to, and represent that in your advertising. Could be about placement, could be about messaging, but be strategic. Don't just spray and pray, right? And stay consistent. So social, I think, is one of arguably, if not the most valuable tool for marketers. Even if you don't do anything paid on social, it can be hugely, hugely impactful. And don't be afraid to have personality. It doesn't always have to be highlighting a product or feature. I'll tell you, like, social for our company, we have stations around the country who their most performant pieces of content, yeah, of course, viral headlines are always gonna do it. They're gonna go live outside of a courtroom and all of this. Those are always gonna get engagement. Our best and most highly engaged TikTok content right now is a meteorologist at our CW station in Houston who sneaks rap lyrics into his reporting.
Amazing.
Does that immediately like have much value to the weather report? No, not at all, but it makes him human. It makes us human. It makes us speak to our audiences in a way that resonates with them. And all we have to do is just keep doing it. Be present, be relatable, build trust. Those are things that are immediately gonna make a difference. So if you're only posting on social once a week, bump those numbers up. Rookie numbers. And that's really all I've got. I know I just threw a ton of information at you, but I wanted to pause and just see what questions can I answer? Are there situations that we want to brainstorm, things that you're thinking about? Opening it up to you guys. Yes, ma'am.
How would you apply this? So I'm a portrait photographer, but I have a very targeted audience because I go to people's homes and I design wall art for them. So when it comes to targeting that audience, like how do I track what they like or their other interest in that sense? Because mainly my business is ran on word of mouth and the experience about it with me. And I try to make the videos of like going to hang the wall art up because all of our wall art, I recruit my husband because he's a carpenter, but all of our wall art is professionally hung up for you as well. So you don't have to ask to do it. And it's a very specific, like, I don't say luxury, but it's a like boutique portrait experience.
Mhm.
That target audience is very small. In the area that I'm in, which around here, I'm technically in Livingston and it's even smaller than McLean. So how would you suggest going about
Yeah.
that?
So in that case, little bit more, I think, just like research on your end, and this could be something that goes back to the idea of surveying and kind of this kind of stuff. The most valuable way to turn even a small database into something bigger is to look at the attributes of those users and find what trends there are. So in this case, are most of your consumers homeowners? Do they live in standalone houses or apartments? Do they have families? Do they, do you do a lot of engagement sessions? So are we looking at like wedding related, so kind of understanding, and then even things like, are there certain types of photography styles that they respond to? Are there things that you can see in that ecosystem that you've created with your subscribers that you can then turn into advertising or content and things like that? So it's a little bit more manual as opposed to, being able to plug it into a system and map all of their devices and things like that. If you're starting with a small business, a small number of audiences, build the rhetoric and start paying attention to what they respond to. And then that ultimately will inform the types of content that you post, where you post it, how you're engaging with these users, and ultimately is there an offer that they're going to respond to? Is there something that's useful there? And when you get to scale, when you're kind of thinking about how do I find more of these, things like boosting content, it automatically is going to give you more exposure with an existing audience, but then also gives you the ability to take the attributes that you know of that audience and add it into that paid exposure as well. So you can start showing up to those quote unquote lookalikes, more people who are similar to the people who are already engaging with you.
Do you see like an average a day? Like, so when you boost content, there's always a budget. Like, do you see kind of more of a response when it comes to services instead of like retail on either like a higher budget for a certain amount of days or a lower budget for an extended amount of?
It kind of depends. So lower budget for an extended number of days, I would look at that more like a branding play. It's kind of like a consistent, it's always going to be there at least a little bit. When you're looking at something that's more offer specific, time sensitive, you want more impact in a shorter term, condense as much budget into a shorter period of time as you can. I just did this with actually putting my own money where my mouth is, and it's almost too relevant, you guys. I'm going to hit on so many themes here right now. A friend of mine is a tattoo artist. Previously had a whole like slew of followers in Chicago, moved to New York and said, I need to get new people. He did a contest on Instagram and it was basically, okay, well, we knew that they followed tattoo content, that they liked, certain things, they were responding to certain things. We built the creative based on the imagery we knew would perform well. And then we targeted it not only to his existing audiences, but then also the lookalikes. And ultimately what that allowed us to do, because we started with the budget concentrated, we only spent $150. Concentrated it more in the front half of the week and then tailed it out over the back half of the week. I don't remember off the top of my head, but he had like 40 contest entries and, for $150 for a new artist breaking into a new city. It's that consumer preference, really being specific about what we want them to do. The goal of driving first party data, the goal of building new subscriber base with ultimately the ancillary benefits of getting new customers and getting new traction from a business perspective. I like saturation. I like frequency. I like more concentration over a shorter period of time. Because I feel like I'm a instant gratification person, but that long tail is super important too. So depending on what your abilities are and depending on kind of what your goal is, I think there's a different answer by situation, but I'm always going to say like, yeah, front load because you'll get more results shorter term that way.
Thank you.
Yes. So I work for a small nonprofit and the biggest thing that we've like run into with like Facebook advertising and boosting is if you say volunteer opportunity, Facebook doesn't let you segment it.
No, I know Facebook is so ridiculous with all of this lately.
Do you have any tips or tricks for that or kind of how to like, because our average volunteer age is 74. Our
Mhm.
ideal person is newly retired. So like we know our audience, but we just are throwing our thing out into the Facebook void and it did work.
Yeah.
Like it's been working really well.
Good, yeah, so, but the
but-
problem is that you're feeling like, you're getting a little bit more red tape when you're explicit and saying, we want volunteers, Facebook goes, I'm not sure about that.
Well,
Yeah.
ideally, we would run a Facebook ad that would let us target 55 and over that says, use your time when you're retired, volunteer with us.
Mhm.
But because we say volunteer, we have to promote it to
Right.
18 and over.
But yes,
And then we get
okay.
18-year-olds who call us and are like, oh, you have to be 21 to volunteer. Sorry.
That's like one of the things, so social, I'm having a little bit of a fight with Facebook and like, it's, you know why? It's because Apple and Meta are fighting. Every time one of them makes a change to their own tech stack, the other one has to make a change. And now Facebook is kind of just a mess of like restrictions. You can't target anything geographically anymore for certain categories. Like there are so many red tape elements that like I don't even have. So like the best response that I would have to that is like just being careful with your language. But like that's the thing about Facebook's loopholes is like sometimes you're kind of strong-armed or not loopholes, but it's Facebook's red tape is you're kind of strong-armed into following their rules because there's no other option. For things like that though, you could almost, of course, like what I'm thinking about is like ad related, but being able to attract like some very easily targetable segments that would result in data for you. So like the conquest email, like we were talking about, very easy to target because it's an opted in audience, because it's like somebody who, we're really just speaking to an addressable audience. It's a finite piece of information. It's a lot easier to target by age or income or credit score or behavior in a way that Facebook doesn't allow anymore. So in that case, I would segment out an audience via email that was between a certain age, living in a certain region, interest in charitable giving, or, previously, I forget what the actual title is for charitable donor, or there's like an actual target we have that's like for people who are likely to get involved in charity and community give back. that to me feels, given the regulations on Facebook, if we're kind of struggling to see the results or we can't even speak directly to the audience that we want to, if you are looking for something more granular, that's a good way to do it because it doesn't face the same restrictions and then you get resulting data from it too. So I like email. I think social is good if it's still working, even despite the fact that you can't be super granular, like absolutely keep doing it. It's just one of those things. But if you connect with Bret, Bret could probably take a look at like, even if you have an existing audience and you're like, these are people who have worked with us in the past, Bret could probably make some recommendations around like, hey, here's where we would find those users now. Yeah, our stuff is pretty cool because it actually will say like, oh, based on these people, this is the content they're looking at, or this is the physical location. There's a lot of ways to slice and dice it. I'm having a fight with Facebook right now
That makes
because,
me feel better.
yeah, no, like, honestly,
I
like,
think we all are.
Yeah.
yeah, so the
And like on the consumer side, like I would love to get your ad, but instead I get like newborn photography in North Carolina. Like
what is so like, that's the other thing. It's like, when you're looking at these self-service platforms, there's always a much bigger room for error. There are so many times that I'm like, oh, I shouldn't be getting that. Like, I was in Connecticut and I got a politician's ad and politics, like, oh, first of all, I'm like, oh my God, somebody would be so mad about this, but got a political ad for a candidate in like Maryland or something. And I was like, first of all, I don't know why I would be seeing this. I haven't been there. Second of all, I'm in Connecticut. Third of all, I mean, it was like, there were like a whole slew of things. I was like, this is definitely not meant for me. And that's a negative consumer experience. It's bad for the advertiser. They just wasted the impression. You're like, this doesn't have anything to do with me. It kind of makes you go, what the
It
hell are you?
makes us as digital marketers mad too, because if I get something like that, it's like, oh, man.
Like, I could have done that so much
That's
better.
Better.
Well, that just happened on a Facebook ad that I went out and from another mentor, they said $40 a day, 3 days, see how it goes. And I did that. And I was getting people calling me like, oh, you're close to me. You're close to Texas. I'm like, oh, you're in Texas? Like, how are you getting my ad?
So, okay, the other thing about addressability and working off of your own databases and stuff is because I'm gonna tell you, the biggest dirty secret in digital is that a lot of it is crap. A lot of it is crap. So ad fraud, the big platforms. Did you know that 90 cents of every dollar that you spend on advertising goes back to big tech? Facebook is pocketing that, Google is pocketing that. So like, when it comes to how much of your money actually goes to speaking to your advertiser and the lift it takes to get that ad out there, 90% of that dollar is profit for big tech. So first of all, they're all about money. Second of all, ad fraud, bot traffic, data cleanliness issues. It's in the news for a reason. Like even the big guys. So healthy dose of cynicism and asking questions here. I'm going to tell you, Google came under fire because a third party like auditing company went through and analyzed a whole bunch of campaigns. It was like tons and tons of campaigns, like very, very large scale. It came from major holdco agencies, like big brands. Analyzed all these campaigns that were supposed to be running in TV and video inventory and found out that 90% of the campaigns surveyed had fraudulent ad delivery by Google's own definition. Google themselves, because there is no regulation in digital advertising, very, very little oversight or regulation from the government. The big players like Facebook and Google are the ones who set the rules. Google set the definition for ad fraud and then broke it on all of their own campaigns. Group M, massive agency, turned around and said, Google, you need to give us all of our money back. And that's real. That's happening like right now. If you look at ad fraud in things like display and all of this, Facebook, oh my God, we could talk about Facebook's, like, oh, here's one. Facebook and Apple are fighting, right? Because every time one of them makes an update, it impacts the other one. Apple launched an update that says if a Facebook user in the Facebook app on an Apple device clicks on a Facebook ad and then goes and does the immediate like make a purchase functionality, Apple is automatically entitled to up to 30% commission on any of those transactions just because it happened in their platform. business owners are like, what the heck? Like, I'm not gonna pay more. I'm not gonna pay additional fees on every transaction I get from social media. Everybody's been telling me that's the only place I should spend my money. Like, what do you mean? I have all this money in my Facebook advertising, trying to drive leads. And now you're telling me that every single one of those transactions is gonna cost me a fee. Facebook turned around and said, okay, you guys, we have the solution. We have the solution. Just don't run mobile ads. So we as business owners and marketers are literally totally at the mercy of the big platforms that are calling all the shots. And let me tell you, none of them are helpful to us. None of them are helpful to us, and none of them are beneficial to our customers either. And this is why doing things like addressable, building your own databases, finding consumers that you build direct relationships, and then using big tech to speak directly to those users. Don't rely on big tech to do the legwork for you, because I'm gonna tell you, it's all gonna be BS. And that's, again,
It's also really important to bring up, I talked about ad fraud and so forth. We, Nexstar, we pay how much money? Millions of dollars?
millions.
So yes, big tech is against, us doing what we want to do. But as an organization, trying to do business with you, we pay millions of dollars into a system called Moat that verifies all of our traffic. So if, with our dashboard and with our tracking, if you run 100,000 impressions for us, 100,000 impressions or more with the dashboard, they will all be targeted. They will to a human.
So that's probably where the pat on the back comes in, is like Nexstar, generally speaking. I worked for Nexstar for a long time, for a little bit, came back, and there's a reason I came back, and it's because when you work across all of the big platforms, right? I worked with every media company. You see that not everybody has a grasp of things like ad fraud, or understanding like exactly the role that ad fraud plays in the digital ecosystems we created. Nexstar has a very sophisticated approach to things like that. And I mean, that's exactly, like Moat is a really good example, where most companies are self-verifying that their impressions are delivering, and they're, just matching up their logs with the ad server logs and saying, great, check the box, everything's done. Nexstar actually hires a third party that goes in real time and verifies that every impression is delivering to a real human being, and that it's got great viewability on it, because it's all because there's no oversight in digital. There's a lot of wiggle room, and a lot of people just take advantage.
She's said it, but my go-to phrase is always that we don't have to like the fact that Google and Facebook run the world that we have.
Yes. But we can also be revolutionary. We can be,
Yes.
we can be a little punk rock about it and find out. So, that's it. I appreciate you guys listening, hanging, this is fun.
And, you can always, we're moving offices. As you might know, we're going to be over on 217 East Washington by the Castle Theater. Hopefully soon, because I got a bunch of boxes in my car. But if you want to make an appointment, I can get Bret down here pretty much most days of the week. And
I'm very mobile.
Yes. And you can, I know Ben has my card. If you need my card, I've got it here in my pocket, so.
Or mine. I have mine as
Yeah.
well.
I don't have
And
to.
if you have questions or anything, you call me direct. I use me as a resource too, because if I said this last year, and I mean it. If there's a question that I can't answer, I don't want to know that answer as well. So I'm going to find someone that has the answer.
I was paying a marketing company. It was $100 a month, and I thought it was gonna be best thing ever, but they're the ones who suggested like the Facebook thing. But I think like the leads were mainly bots, like